Hello and welcome to Aero Innovations. I'm Aero, your AI host. Well, I'm not actually an AI. Some of the viewers to my channel have gotten confused over this, so let's nip that issue right now in the bud. AI in this case does not actually stand for artificial intelligence, but actually stands for Aero Innovations. Think of me as your casino host. I'm here to give you a pleasant experience during your stay visiting my channel. I'm a Las Vegas pro specializing in low stakes, no limit hold'em. So if you're here to learn some tips and tricks on how to crush low stakes poker, you've come to the right place. If you're a couch potato looking to get your nipples hard by living vicariously through someone else, you've also come to the right place. This session takes place Friday night, August 24th at 12:41 in the morning, so I guess it's technically Saturday morning. As usual, we're playing 2-5 no limit hold'em at the Wynn Encore in Las Vegas, where I bind for 1,500, which is 300 big blinds. Only a few minutes into the session, I open to 20 in the low jack with ace-king offsuit. The hijack and button both call before the small blind 3-bets to a massive $120 with a 2K starting stack that covers me. She's an Asian chick I've played with a couple times previously who's never seen me bluff. It's time to capitalize on that image. A hand like ace-king will miss 2 out of 3 flops. That's just the plain mathematics. If I call with this hand, I do have position, but I'm going to be pissing away $120 2 out of 3 times. On boards where I hit an ace or a king, if my opponent has a middling to premium pocket pair all the way to queens, how often will I get paid? Rarely ever, right? Plus, if I just call here, I'll incentivize the 2 players behind me to call, who both have position over me. So with a hand like ace-king, it's better to isolate and retain position than simply call and pray to not only hit, but also get paid off. You'll be working with fold equity on your side. So for all of those reasons, I 4-bet to 320. It's a price point that incentivizes the 3-better to stay in, meanwhile kicking out the 2 other players behind me. Although if everyone just folds, I don't mind picking up the dead money either. Notice that I didn't choose an amount like 500. That would just be nonsensical and won't leave me with any wiggle room to make adjustments on future streets. Also, if your opponent had a hand like aces or kings, you'd just be gifting them your stack on a silver platter. So here, as predicted, the hijack and button fold, but the small blind calls. The flop comes 6, jack, 6 with 2 spades. This is a pretty polarizing flop. I don't need to bet very much to get a hand that completely missed that flop to fold. In a heads-up situation, given the pre-flop action, you shouldn't have to worry about the flush draw either. This is a better than average flop. I'm only realistically concerned about pocket jacks. Before my opponent checks to me, I notice she's staring at me very intently. She's trying to pick up a read. Unfortunately for her, this action within itself also gives me a read. I mean, she's very concerned about my hand. So we can rule out pocket jacks from the equation. So when the action checks to me, I down bet to 250, which is about a 35% pot bet. This is a similar sizing amount I would use if I had an actual made hand like kings or aces. My opponent doesn't take too long before making the call, which means she has a pocket pair of some sort. If I had to guess, my opponent has a hand like pocket tens or pocket queens. The turn is an 8 of clubs, not changing anything. At this point, the vast majority of players would give up. My opponent has called $320 pre-flop and $250 on the flop. She's already committed nearly $600. She has a very strong hand. I'm sitting here with ace high and no draw of any kind other than the elusive ace from space that sometimes visit naughty boys and girls who bet with nothing only to sometimes get rewarded on the river. The polar opposite is also true. Here, other players might get nervous and shove in their whole stack when checked to, hoping and praying for a fold. But consider this. If you had aces or kings, would you really shove here knowing your opponent likely has 2 outs? I don't know about you, but on a board this seemingly safe, that's not something I would do. Your bluffs have to make as much sense as your real hands. When you bluff, you're telling a story, and your story needs to add up. Look, Mr. Officer, sir, I know it may have looked like I was holding my phone while driving, but as you can see, I have a phone holder right here on the dashboard. Why would I be holding my phone to my ear when I have a very obvious phone holder right there?
What seems to be the problem, officer? I am not a crook. My name is Disco. I'm a parakeet. Dear letter.
So here, my opponent is boring into me with her eyes. If I thought she was trying to pick up information on the flop, she's really looking for something she can use now. This makes me feel a lot more at ease. I'm going to force even a hand like pocket queens to fold from an opponent who has never seen me bluff.
Call an ambulance! But not for me!
Now, you may think pocket queens is an absolute monster on a jack-high board, but think about it logically for a moment. Don't get married to your hand. Given the pre-flop action, pocket queens here is a pure bluff catcher. you may as well have a hand like 8-9 offsuit here. If I had a hand like pocket jacks, which queens were ahead of preflop, now I've caught up and queens are drawing to 2 outs. If I had a hand like aces or kings, nothing has changed. Queens are still drawing to only 2 outs. You would only be beating my exact current holding. So knowing all of this, I fire another bullet for 500, leaving me barely over 400 behind. This actually looks way stronger than if I'd gone all in. My opponent tanks for about 30 seconds before letting her hand go. I get my first bluff through for a considerable amount only a few minutes into the session. The very next hand, under the gun, limps. +1 raises to 25. I might 3-bet here maybe about half the time, but considering I just bluffed a pretty huge hand and I still haven't even stacked my chips yet, I'm not quite ready to play another huge 3-pot bet just yet. So I make the call with ace-jack of spades in the middle position. The hijack, button, and under the gun limper all call. We go 5 ways to a flop of jack, 4, 6 with 2 clubs, which is a beautiful flop all things considered. I much prefer this to an ace-high flop. When the action gets checked to me, I start with a 60% pot bet of 75. The hijack calls. The button and under the gun fold, and the original raiser in the +1 calls as well. The turn brings in a 6 of hearts, which pairs the middle pair. This is not my favorite card in the world, which would obviously be another jack or an ace, but it's much preferable to a club. It is possible one of my opponents could be holding a 6 here some of the time, but when the +1 checks, I lead for another 60% pot size bet of 225. The hijack calls again, leaving himself about 250 behind, but the original raiser folds. The river is a 7 of diamonds, which I'm pretty happy to see. Unless my opponent is a loosey-goosey sitting there with 3-5, the flush miss, and I'm about to get some delicious value out of a weaker jack.
So good and tasty.
So I go all in, expecting either an immediate call or an immediate fold. I get neither. My opponent tanks for about 45 seconds. I'm very confused. What hand calls on the turn, has showdown value, but doesn't plan to immediately call the river? Given how big the pot is, like if you have a jack here, were you really hoping to hit 3 outs for half your stack on the turn? Eventually my opponent does make the call. I table my hand, and he shows jack-queen offsuit for a dominated smaller top pair. For starters, I personally don't play these types of hands even for a limp. Forget about a 5x raise pot. These types of hands are in my category of dominated hands. Even if you hit top pair, you don't know if you're good, and if you're not good, you're dominated to 3 outs, which is not a whole lot of outs. Secondly, if you call the turn with that sort of hand, you have to snap call the river. Never call hoping to hit 3 outs with a dominated hand. Either you're good or you're not. If you think you're good on the turn, you have to call the river if the flush doesn't get there. If you do not put me on the flush draw and you think you're beat, you cannot call the turn. You don't have anywhere near the right odds. I originally posted about this hand on my Instagram, but here's the vlog to go along with it. With this win, I'm up $1,310 only 10 minutes into the session. If I were to stop right now, that'd be like over 7K an hour. I'd also have like a 100% win ratio. That'd be pretty insane to boast, huh? But featuring only 2 poker hands in a vlog would be pretty boring, so let's just continue. It's a full 35 minutes before I play this next hand. I limp under the gun with pocket 4s. My position is too weak and my hand is too small to open raise, so limping is the most profitable option in my opinion. The low jack raises to 35 with a $1,400 starting stack. Everyone else folds. We're more than deep enough to set mine, so I make the easy call. The flop comes 4, 5, 6 with 2 diamonds. We flop bottom set on an incredibly connected board. I would normally just lead here, not expecting my opponent to connect on an all-low board like this. But his pre-flop raise of 35 is a lot bigger than normal. A lot of overpairs raise an amount that large, so I start with a check. My opponent c-bets for 55, which is a much larger than normal c-bet. Okay, good. He definitely has a hand worth continuing. I put in the good old-fashioned check raise, but only to 125. I purposefully chose an amount that would provoke the bull. It's almost a feeler type of size, as if I have a weak hand that is trying to get an ace-x type of hand to fold. My opponent must have realized this, because he puts in another raise to 300.
You sure about that? You sure about that?
Oh my goodness. This is exactly the type of response I was hoping for. If this board were different, like ace 4-8 rainbow, I would just smooth call here. However, this is not the type of board to slow play on. There's an obscene amount of cards that could come on the turn that would totally kill the action, or even worse yet, give my opponent the lead. He could easily have an ace-high flush draw. He could also have an overpair that he won't be willing to let go of quite yet at this juncture, but easily fold if the turn is another diamond, a 6, or any small card that puts a 1 card straight on board. Taking all of that into consideration, I shove all in. My opponent tanks for a full minute and a half. He eventually shows that he's carrying a 7 of hearts and makes the laydown.
That's what I thought. Nerd.
Turns out he's a much looser opponent than I had originally thought. I never would have put a 7 in his range when he raised preflop for so big. Turns out he was actually the one making the semi-bluff on a draw, so I'm glad I shut down his equity. One orbit later, I limp under the gun with pocket 4s yet again. The +1 limps as well. The small blind completes, when the big blind suddenly raises to 50 with over a 2K stack. This is a massive 10x raise. This is highly unusual. +1 calls out of turn with a $700 stack before I've even acted, and the original raiser is definitely deep enough for me to set mine profitably, so I make the call as well. The small blind gets out of the way. The flop comes 2, queen, 9, rainbow. When the big blind checks to me, I didn't hit a set, so I can only check 2, and the +1 checks as well. The turn is a 7 of hearts, putting 2 hearts on board. That aside, the action gets checked around. The river is a 5 of spades, not changing anything. The big blind doesn't want to show his hand, so I just table mine. Suddenly, the +1 goes to show his hand, so obviously I think I'm no good, but then he rolls over 10 jack offsuit. The big blind folds, and I'm good, but I'm like, what just happened here? I learned a couple of very valuable things about my opponents. If the big blind had just c-bet with an ace-high type of holding, I would have just folded, because I didn't hit a set in a multi-way pot, and this board smashes a good amount of his range. The +1 would have called since he's open-ended, but seeing how he played the rest of the hand, he's unlikely to put in a bluff in future streets, so ace-high would have just taken down the pot. That's one way this hand could have gone. Secondly, the +1 was willing to call $50 with 10 jacks offsuit, a hand that is not even in my limping range. That already boggles my mind. And then after flopping the almost perfect flop, which is open-ended on a rainbow board, the action gets checked to him, but he just checks the action back, not even bothering to put in a semi-bluff. He could have taken the pot then and there. When the action checked to him a second time on the turn, he had a second opportunity to take down the pot yet again, but didn't monopolize on that time either. I should never have won this hand, but I'm glad that I did, and I also gained some valuable information against 2 of my opponents on the table as well. For this next hand, under the gun limps, the middle position raises to 35 with a $2,500 stack. That's a really big open raise amount. I have a top 4 hand in position no less, but I don't want to 3-bet here only to be 4-bet and be put in a bad spot against a hand like aces or kings. I would have 3-bet against any raise up to about $25. Plus, I don't want to be completely transparent. I don't always 3 or 4-bet with ace-king. That way, if my opponent is raising with a hand like ace-jack or ace-queen and an ace hits, he'll never put me on a hand like ace-king. I may be a really aggressive player, but I don't like to do anything 100% of the time, and I definitely don't like to be predictable. So here, I just call with ace-king of hearts on the button. The blinds fold, but under the gun calls as well. The flop comes 3, 5, king with 2 clubs. Both opponents check to me. I start with a half-pot bet of 50. This should incentivize any middling to upper pocket pair below a king to continue, since I won't necessarily always have a king here. As my loyal vlog watchers know, I often bet in position with complete air when checked to. Unfortunately, both of my opponents quickly fold. This is just an example of how I don't always 3 or 4 bet with a monster like ace-king suited. You have to be wary of your opponent's opening size. If I were playing 1-3, that's the equivalent of like a $21 raise. That's a massive open for a 1-3 game, and I definitely advocate against 3-betting with ace-king against raises that large from opponents in early position. Oftentimes, you could be very well up against kings or aces here. For this particular hand, this didn't end up being the case, but I always caution against being results-oriented. I advise caution when your opponent telegraphs massive strength. For this next hand, I open to 15 under the gun with pocket 8s. The low jack, high jack, and big blind all call. We go 4 ways to flop a 5, 6, 8 with 2 clubs. Hot damn! We just flopped top set.
Oh yeah!
This is not exactly the kind of board I'm super stoked about though. Keep in mind, whenever you have top set, what do the other players have? Don't make the mistake of checking on a board like this. 1. This board is way too coordinated. 2. It is unlikely anyone has anything they can bet with, so you'd just be giving up free cards, meanwhile keeping the pot small, which is 2 very bad mistakes rolled into one check. So when the big blind checks, I start with a 2/3 pot bet of 40. Only the hijack calls. The turn brings in an ace of hearts. Okay, so we know my opponent is most likely on a draw of some sort. That ace shouldn't change anything, other than definitely solidifying the fact that she's on a draw if she calls me here, since an ace is more likely to hit me if I led the flop with air. I would never actually do that, betting into 3 players with just random overcards, but she doesn't need to know that. So here I isolate her calling range down to only a flush draw with a massive 90% pot bet of 125 into the $140 pot. I primarily only have 2 types of bets, discounting my bluffs. The bet sizes I choose are designed to either gain information or gain max value. All of your bets should be targeted to do the same. This skill set is why I often pinpoint my opponents down to exact hands. Sometimes you see me make bets such as half pot or 60% pot bets. These types of bets are targeted towards opponents whom I put on top pair in dominated situations where they only have 3 outs. Other times I'll do 80 to 100% pot bets. These types of bets are targeted towards people who are most likely on draws. The more outs you think your opponent has, the higher the price point you need to make. So here my opponent makes the call, so I'm definitely putting her on a flush draw of some sort, which may or may not include a gut shot as well. The river is a 9 of hearts, so a 7 does make a straight. There's no point to betting here though, since you'll only be committing suicide if your opponent rivered the straight. So obviously I check. If my opponent does put out a pot-sized bet, I plan to snap call. She's much more likely to be on a flush draw as opposed to a straight draw due to the bet sizing that I chose on the turn. Although it's also possible that she could have had a combo draw that included both the straight and the flush draw. You can never be right 100% of the time when deducing a hand. You can only ever go with what's most plausible and trust that you'll be right enough times to be equitable versus the times that you're wrong. Unfortunately, this advice only works against thinking players. In a 1-2 or a 1-3 game, players are more focused on their own hands and discredit the board completely. So in a 1-2 or 1-3 game, you're much more likely to have players who call on just an open-ended straight draw there, so keep that in mind. Here, my opponent checks back the river, so I table my hand for a small win. Up $2,079 only 1 hour and 41 minutes into my session. 30 minutes later, I open to 15 under the gun with pocket 7s. The hijack calls. The big blind suddenly 3 bets to 90 with 750 behind. He's the classic tight OMC who can never lay down an overpair. And he has just enough for me to set mine with that price point, so I make the call. The hijack makes the call as well, improving the implied odds even further. The flop comes 3-9-2 with 2 spades. The big blind leads for a massive bet of 200. You guys have seen me call with middle pair for my entire stack before. You've also seen me call with a small pair when I don't believe my opponent, only to get lucky and spike a set on the turn. However, every single play you make should take into consideration your audience. This is not the type of opponent who's going to continue betting on a flop like this with an ace-high type of hand. This is almost always an overpair. Remember this valuable lesson, guys. Vary your plays depending upon your opponent. So here, I just make the easy fold and move on. Okay, so the hand before this hand, I 3-bet a $20 open to 75 with pocket aces. I didn't get any action, but it's always nice to immediately peel another monster the very next hand. Here, I open to 25 in the +1 with a pair of luscious ladies. The low jack 3-bets to 50 with a 2K stack. He's our opponent from earlier who randomly showed the 7 of hearts after I flopped bottom set. I've come to the conclusion he's pretty aggro. Earlier, this guy got a lucky double up by cold 4-bet jamming for 1,000 against the tightest OMC on the table. He got snap called by what I can only assume is kings or aces. But then he got super lucky to flop a set and ended up making quads to add insult to injury. So against a player like that, I'm going to choose a larger than normal 4-bet amount and hope that he sticks around. Plus, a min raise to 50 is not even a real thing. There are 0 hands in my arsenal that make that sort of play. So when everyone folds to me, I put in a 4-bet to 225 to deny equity against whatever nonsense he's holding. Plus, I'm out of position, so I need to charge more for that inconvenience. Unfortunately, my opponent makes the fold. I just wanted to give you an example of 3 and 4-bet amounts since I rarely showcase hands that don't at least make it to the turn or river. The next 40 minutes go by uneventfully. I've pretty much flatlined over the last hour and a half, so I decided to call it an early night. In for 1500, and out for $35.22 for a juicy profit of $2,022 after only 3 hours and 2 minutes of playtime. You'll notice I didn't hardly play anything during this session except pocket pairs or ace king. Some viewers might consider this type of session boring. You have to keep something in mind. I don't play poker for fun or excitement. That stopped being a thing for me a long time ago. I've been doing this for a living for nearly 17 years. Unlike for recreational players, I'm here to make the most money possible. Yes, sometimes I play dog urine hands like 5-7 offsuit, but that's only in position after multiple limpers. It's also only something I do occasionally. So if you're uncomfortable with how much I win a month, even with my very limited hours, and if you don't have the patience to wait for premium hands or decent hands in good position, then please, by all means, keep playing hands like 3-7 suited, 8-10 offsuit, or even Jack-Queen offsuit. Me personally, I'm here to make the most money possible. If you like what you've seen today, please like this video. Then consider subscribing to my channel for more tips and tricks on how to crush low stakes, no limit hold'em. I also provide coaching as well. You can find my rates on my Patreon page, or just drop by there if you want to support the channel monetarily. My wife and I are busy working full time to get these vlogs out to you guys as fast as we can. The money we make off of YouTube ads barely covers the cost of the editor I've hired since we're still such a small channel. The $800 I gave away last month during the cash giveaway all came out of my pocket. But any time I spend coaching my latest acolyte, Marto the Martian, will go towards my coaching series, which will be available on my Patreon. So any help we get in terms of spreading the word out, any coaching lessons I'm able to book, or any support we get from Patreon really helps keep this channel afloat. As usual, thanks for watching, and I hope to catch you guys in the next video.